This is Tobin Arthur, your host for Innovation4Alpha, sponsored by AngelMD, and I am joined by friend Dr. Jack Cochran, who is a fantastic physician and leader and author. And Jack and I have begun having some conversations about the topic of leadership in a time of change, physician leadership specifically. And no better time for leadership to be demonstrated than in the current crisis around COVID-19. Dr. Cochran, welcome. Always good to spend some time and chat with you.
Thank you, Tobin. Good to join you.
Thank you. Well, we're clearly in some uncharted territories in some ways, at least for most of us in our lifetime. I've been reading, and we've got some great folks in our network who've been sharing stories and analysis from the Spanish flu of 1918, which has some interesting corollaries. But, I just was curious as to your experience over the years. I mean, certainly maybe things wouldn't be exactly like what we're going through now, but there are always challenges and crises throughout the times. And are there any experiences that you had during your career where you can recall back to where not just individuals, but entire systems and communities had to step up and address some particular issue?
Absolutely, Tobin. Very challenging time. And you and I and all of our colleagues, our hearts go out to our brothers and sisters, and hope we all stay well, stay well, and stay connected with those we love. And, send an extra nice email, text, phone message, or note card to somebody, letting them know you're there and you care. So I've had because of this sort of quote downtime, it's been really a great time of reflection. And as a person who took on leadership out of a odd pathway from pure clinical care to becoming a leader, I've had a lot of chances to reflect on how that went and what I've learned. And, I think every time there is a crisis like this, we believe this is the biggest one. This has to be the last one, et cetera. And I think that one of the things I think is most important for leaders in times like this is to show up. It is extremely important to show up. You cannot delegate, whether it's screen to screen, face to face, phone to phone, text to text. You can't delegate that, because as a leader, one of the things you have built over time is trust. And that trust is very important. It's sort of the currency of relationships and leading change. And part of that is built by the ability to listen, to really be able to listen, and listening by trying to really hear what's going on with people, acknowledge their situation, acknowledge what's going on with them, and then build from that, adding your own knowledge, your own context, and saying, but I also have learned this or found this, and to start to co-create understanding and knowledge and awareness. And I think that's really important. It's how you sort of manage yourself, which is very important right now. One of the things that I have noticed in some of the different approaches to leadership today, because first of all, as much as we all have a need to control, a need to predict, and a need to know what's going on next so that we can be aware of it, control it, all the things that we're accustomed to experiencing, we're really not in control of what's left. And so a lot of what we have to understand is how we're going to manage what's left and what's next. And so not burn too many bridges. And I just want to throw in so I'll say, I think there's three sort of behaviors that are extremely important right now. And then I'm going to talk about one that bothers me. I think the three behaviors that are more important, and this is under the premise of show up, be there. Don't delegate this because you're too busy. You've got to go to a conference or a conference call. The first behavior is compassion. There is nobody that's having an easy time, and people are having fears that are new, that are amplified, that are different, and that are absolutely terrifying from their context. And in spite of having this fear, they've lost some of their support system, the people at the restaurant, the people at work, the people at the barber shop, etc. So compassion is extremely important. I think it's kind of job one. The second thing that I think is important for leadership, and I like to think in these sort of threes, is clarity. I think clarity is extremely important because people are getting a cacophony of input and knowledge and mistruths and misconceptions along with good information. And so clarity is important. Not the clarity that says I'm omniscient, I know all the answers, listen to me, but it's that clarity that understands the importance to be listening, be humble, and to be compassionate, because the clarity is not come to me for all the answers, but come to me, we can trust each other and having a good conversation. That kind of clarity. And the third is consistency, which is I'm not going to show up today as a totally different person than I was the day before. And that leads me to one of my observations, Tobin, which bothers me. And I've written a little bit about this, and I call it reassurance is not leadership. And we all want to take these difficult times and make them better, right? We want to make the pain go away for ourselves, our constituents, our friends, our colleagues, our families. And so because of that urgency and that insecurity, et cetera, we sort of have to understand that we can't always just make it go away. We got to show compassion, we got to show clarity. But reassurance, I learned a long time ago, is a very troubled approach. And people have said to me, well, you want to be reassuring, you want to be encouraging. And I said, no, let's listen to the concept. And I learned this many years ago. We were running a huge implementation of an information technology system in my organization, Kaiser Permanente. And as any major new complex change effort will do, it was not going smoothly. It was not going as well as it could, or as we thought it should. And so as one of the two national leaders for the whole organization in this project, the two leaders came to me and to one of my health plan executive partners to give us an update on what was going on, how things were going, which I very much appreciated. But as they went through what their message was to me, I started to get bothered and actually agitated, because what they were doing was they were trying to reassure me that everything was okay. And what do I mean by that? Well, to me, it felt like the little kid who was having somebody pat them on the head and saying, Jack, don't worry your little self about this. Everything's going to be okay. And I realized it was like a pebble in my shoe. It was very bothersome to me. And so we had actually interrupted the meeting. And I said, we got to stop talking about content and talking about each other and how we're going to work together and trust each other. And they go, what? I said, honestly, I have a big responsibility, and you guys are on point to carry it out. And you are reassuring me. And they said, well, Jack, we're doing the hard work. We want you to feel okay. I said, the net ability for me to feel okay doesn't seem like it's going to come from you just saying, don't worry about it, it's okay. They go, well, we don't want you to worry because we're having to worry. I said, here's what I need from you. And this was thinking on my feet, learning on the run, or maybe learning on my tail. I was sort of knocked back. I said, here's what I really need from you. I need honest, dead solid, honest truth. Let's start from there, because I don't want to feel better based on it's like standing on quicksand. I don't want to feel better for a minute and find out I'm sinking. So let's start off with the absolute, dead solid truth. And then what I'd like from you is some humility. So absolute honesty and then humility. And they go, what do you mean humility? I said, well, if you arm me with misconceptions and then bravado, then I'm going to go out there and decide that all the world has to do is hear my partial truth and the bravado, and they'll feel better. And they will, but they won't feel better for long when the next data set comes in. So I said, the humility says, we don't have all the answers, and here's what we do have, and where do we go from here? And it's that concept, Tobin, you and I have talked about, of short-term pain relief versus long-term viability. And that short-term pain relief it's very seductive to say, let's do this, let's do that, because it's so hard to deal with the truth. And that's where, compassion and clarity and consistency come in. And I think that the actions that we have to manage. So from that, the actions that we have to think about, I've talked about the behaviors. Number one, manage yourself. Manage yourself because you are viewed as the leader or the significant leader or a significant leader. How do you manage yourself? How do you manage the truth, the difficult question, the angry constituent, the angry person? Because managing yourself really says a lot, and people are watching you because they're looking for signals, they're looking for confidence, they're looking for the truth. And so managing yourself also involves, being empathetic and being understanding and being a good listener, but also involves caring for yourself. In these times of great potential turmoil, you got to find some space. You got to say, all right, I need to go back for 15 minutes, whether it is my office, my bedroom, the front porch, the park, and just sit and reflect and give myself a little forgiveness for what I don't know and a little encouragement for what I need to do. So I think that notion of managing yourself and caring for yourself has got to be job one. The second one is the process of just continuing to build great leaders and teams. People are looking at you in times of crisis, and if you have been teaching them, if you've been expressing an open culture, a high trust culture, you can come to me, I'll be a good listener. If that's what you've been expressing, and then in hard times you model, forget about that, do exactly as I tell you, I've got all the answers, this is really hard, go this way only. Now, I'm not saying that behavior isn't necessary in times of extreme urgency, but if you're talking about a long-term process, if you really go from expressing one thing and modeling another, you not only cut out your own credibility, but you confuse people. And then reinforce it, having your people say, we're going to err on the side of telling the truth, because it's going to be harder in the long run if we try to be too reassuring in the short run. And I'll close by saying one of the great lessons about that is people should read about is Admiral Stockdale. Admiral Stockdale was the longest living Vietnam prisoner of war survivor, and he lived many years in captivity. He was punished. He was tortured. He was treated very, very badly, mercilessly at times. And they said, "What were the things that made you survive, and who were the survivors?" And from his learnings, the famous Stanford business professor Jim Collins came up with the concept of level 5 leadership. And here's what Stockdale learned. He said some of the people that suffered the most, suffered the earliest, and even died were the optimists. And when I read that, I thought, stop. That's how I get through my day, as I say, things are going to get better. Things are going to be okay. And he says, now the optimists, if that was their primary and their overwhelming response to challenge and difficult times, really got in trouble, because they would do things like, well, I know this coronavirus is going to be over by the 1st of May, so I'll be okay by the 1st of May. I'll just, they're going to be okay. And then 1st of May comes and the coronavirus is not over, it's worse. And they had very little to hang on to, because they were just hanging on to the optimism of that sort of slightly false goal. And then it was going to be 4th of July, etc. He said the people that survived the most had a very interesting combination of, first of all, reality. They were realists. They looked at things with the cold heart of day, and that was not easy, and they weren't always easy to think about or be around. But he says the realists who then said to themselves, if this is reality, then what do I need to do? And they then essentially steeled themselves to be relentlessly saying, these rascals are not going to get me. These rascals are not going to be the defining final moment of my life. I am going to simply relentlessly adhere to my own values, my own beliefs of the future, and take this cold reality and say, I will get through it. And he said, so those were the people that survived the most. And Collins said they were level 5 leaders, which were accepting brutal honesty of what reality looks like. And that's not easy. But then saying, okay, this is not going to define me. This is not going to take me down. I will be relentless in my response to that. And when Collins wrote about it, he had talked about a lot of companies that had other leaders that had different characteristics, and how when things really, really got tough, they not only got defined, but they sometimes got redefined. And so I think about all those things as I reflect on what it's like today. Is I've got to show up, if whether it's in a family, in a neighborhood, in a grocery, or in a boardroom. I've got to show up. I've got to show compassion. I've got to show a sense of clarity around, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, but I'll be glad to listen to you, acknowledge what you're saying, and try to co-create a different reality and a different future. And so I think that's what I'm thinking is very complex, but this is not going to be the last. Well, I hope this is not going to be the last major challenge of my life. And so, how do I adapt and adopt the kinds of behaviors I've learned about and from previous crises? And I think this notion of reassurance is something that worries me, because it leads to that, okay, if I can just feel good for a little bit, then everything's going to be okay. Because if that hypothesis or fact set is not true, then where are you going to be when the next negative data hits you?
Yeah, it sounds like if I read between the lines for a few things you're saying, it's hope and realism are not mutually exclusive, and there's a difference between hope, which is, look, at some point we will get through this, but there's, in the meantime, it's realism of, we've got to deal with, there's uncertainty about what it takes to get from here to there, and we just got to take it one day at a time. And remind me, if my history serves, wasn't Admiral Stockdale selected by Ross Perot to be his running mate in that presidential election? I think he was going to be his vice presidential running mate.
I believe so, yes.
That's pretty interesting. A couple of things off of that, and that was really an interesting perspective on leadership. I think it's fantastic. As you think about, one of the things I've noticed over the last, certainly a couple of weeks, physicians are always sort of looked to as experts in people's circles, whether it's in their family or in their communities. They're well educated. They stay on top of their profession in a way that is unique, et cetera. But in a time like this, people in particular, if I listen to conversations, I hear a lot of, well, my friend who's a doctor, or my friend who works at the CDC, or, it's heightened, it's amplified. So when you think about that position that physicians find themselves in, where everybody looks to them as somebody who's been trained in science, who at least has some understanding of everything from vaccines to drug development, et cetera. They may not be experts in all those specific things, but they've got a better overall awareness than the average layperson. How does a physician take that responsibility on? As to your point, they don't necessarily need to pretend like they're the expert on all things science and all things medicine, because medicine's highly specialized, et cetera. But by and large, they are going to have a stronger grasp, understanding. They understand care delivery in a way that 99.9% of the population just doesn't. So people are naturally looking to them, anybody in their sphere who has an MD or DO or PhD after their name, as an expert. How do they respond to that call, if you will? And it's not a call that necessarily was officially given to them. It's just it's a byproduct of the business and the profession that they've chosen.
That's a super question, and I think most of us that have the mantle of being a clinician have had friends, family, colleagues reach out to us and sort of ask our point of view. And it really gets to the core of one of the challenges of being a trusted source and resource for difficult things like clinical questions and clinical issues. We have, by training, because we are trained in the sciences, always aspired for precision and correctness and accurate answers, because science gets to that, we figured this out. And yet, the reality of the day-to-day practice of medicine takes that science as a substrate and as a basis, but is very different in its application. We have to be aware of and understand how to manage ambiguity and uncertainty. Because ultimately, and you see this in patients that are talking positively about doctors and negatively, patients actually don't expect omniscience. What they really want is trust. And they want trust on the journey. And it's sort of like when doctors realize that they can no longer help a patient who has a fatal condition. Those are moments of great ambiguity and uncertainty. And if the best you can say is, well, let's go find another miracle, and I'm so hopeful, etc., you've got to start to say, the role of healer is more than just being omniscient and being the expert and delivering knowledge that only you have. And actually, we don't only have it in this web-enabled world where everyone's reading a lot of common information. So I think for physicians, we got to realize that we're leaders because of our professional capabilities and our record as professionals. But it's not a lifelong mantle that says you're right or you're correct, you have all the answers. And so sometimes we've got to drop back into that. I know people at this time are looking for more precise answers to the scientific dilemmas, but sometimes I've got to go back to saying, I don't have them. I've got some thoughts, but don't get trapped in saying, you can tell people it's going to be okay. Don't get them terrified. And that's where I think reassurance is such a common thing. Reassurance does not mean you're not encouraging people. It just means don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. I think you have to listen to people. You've got to say, I know you trust me, but here's what I know and what I don't know. And I will, keep learning and keep thinking. And if I hear something, I'll get back to you. But it's very common in the clinical space to have the science and the precision in your quiver, but then realize that there's no place to take that particular solution. So you got to be able to be comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, and you got to be able to listen, acknowledge, and to sort of co-create a pathway. And that's building trust and managing relationships.
That's good. As we look forward a bit, at some point there'll be a reprieve. We'll have an inflection point where we start to come out of this particular threshold crisis, and invariably there'll be a lot of finger pointing and blaming and who did what wrong and this, that, and the other. And I think one of the characteristics around leadership I'd love to get your thoughts on are, as we come out of the reflection period and sort of prepare for how do we do better this next time? What do we learn from this? How does the leader take that opportunity to say, rather than playing the blame game, they step above that and take a position to say, what do we learn and how do we improve? We're all imperfect. Our processes were imperfect. So invariably, there are things we're going to be able to improve. What does that look like at the point when we've gotten past triage, we've gotten past the immediacy of needing to solve what we can now, and then figuring out how do we do better on 2.0, so to speak.
That is so important, Tobin. That's so important because I used to have a CEO friend of mine says, "Don't ever waste a good crisis," and what she meant by that was not something nefarious, but to say, crises occur for reasons that are whatever you may like about them or think about them. They were the logical outcome of the way things happened. There was nothing illogical about the crisis. It happened because a series of factors lined up. And so I think it's very important that we understand. A second, I said something to aggravate Siri.
Siri and I have a constant love-hate relationship. She argues with me constantly.
I didn't realize I had her exposed. So these things happen. They don't happen because of bad luck or bad intention or bad people necessarily. That can happen. But I think that what she meant by "don't ever waste a good crisis," which is, wow, what a series of things to learn and understand about, so that we reduce the risk of this happening again, and/or we learn from it. And in the leadership space, I think that, in my book, I write a piece called Mentors Everywhere. And it's really a revelation that I had, that while I had great teachers, great family members, great, mentors and role models in my life, I learned some of my most amazing lessons from people who were working in a village in Africa, or, people that were totally unrelated to my science and my medical career, et cetera. in a positive sense. How do you learn from a woman who's carrying water 12 kilometers in a village in East Africa? So on the very, very positive side, learning from people. And then the other one is watching people flail and lead in ways that you think are destructive or counterproductive. So mentors can be very important, and you can learn from people positively and negatively. So I think the whole, the Army and several companies do these sort of after action debriefs, and extremely important. Sit down. What are all the factors that led us to this? How do we manage it differently in the future? How do we manage what we've learned? How do we share what we've learned? And how do we change ourselves? And how do we build our sense of our community stronger and better? It's, people who, talk about people on their deathbed, they say, they rarely say, I just wish I would have gone to the office 10 more days. And there's a saying, I think it's from the Japanese, that I read this at my sister's funeral. And my message to my family and friends were, don't wait until the person sitting next to you has a terminal or a fatal or a difficult situation to tell them how much and why you care about them and love them. And I think it was the Japanese said, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. And so don't wait any longer to say, I think I'm going to call my son, I'm going to call my sister, I'm going to call my old mentor who's got cancer. I've got some time and space. I can be bored, I can be cynical, I can be angry, and I can be sad, or I can say, how do I meaningfully, not just sending little cute videos, but how do I meaningfully say, I had time to reflect, and I remember how much you meant to me.
That's good. It's interesting. I was reading not long ago a book on samurai leadership, and part of the samurai culture is that they prepare for mentally and physically every day for death, that they expect that to be their last day, and they live it accordingly. And that has some, strange military applications, but you can also think of it as, to your point, you don't need to wait for, to tell mom you love her or whomever. It's interesting too, a leadership trainer that I know well and has a lot of wisdom said one time, there's a saying that wisdom comes with age. He says, that's totally nonsense. He says, I can show you a lot of old people that are really stupid, doing the same things over and over again. He said, wisdom matched with reflection, age matched with reflection develops wisdom. And it's that reflection piece that's key, he said, so that you can think back on what worked, what didn't work. And that's the course correction that develops wisdom. And I think has a lot of applications. Well, Dr. Cochran, this is it's been good conversation in the midst of a very interesting and challenging time. And I'd love to have some further conversations in the coming weeks. And as we get out of the quarantine period at some point, we'll look forward to having you give a talk to the Colorado community. We've talked about doing that. I'm excited about doing that, not only for our team, but for the growing physician membership. And I think there will be a lot of opportunity for people to step up and develop their leadership skills and have a lot of things to learn from you, both locally and more broadly. So thanks, as always, for spending your time and your reflections. It's always terrific.
Absolutely, Tobin, my pleasure. Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks.